Hey, it's MJ from the Coaches Panel. Welcome back to another player review as we look through every single person that moves clubs, tell you what I think it means for the club they've left, the club they've landed at, and from a fantasy football perspective, what does it mean for us heading into 2025? I hope you're enjoying this series. If you are, make sure you subscribe to the channel on YouTube, follow us across all of the social media outlets that we are on, and keep in touch with us across the audio podcast platforms. We are starting to build towards the opening of the 2025 preseason with the AFL draft. Now, really, pretty much just a month away. John Noble is who we're talking about on this episode, and one of the most successful mid-season draft selections. Been a consistent spot in this Collingwood halfback side, and the reason they've loved him in their team up until this point, and ultimately what I think Gold Coast has loved about him is, while most rebounding and run and carry defenders, which is certainly the skill set of John, sometimes they're very one-dimensional, and by that I mean they don't really have a defensive mindset around them. John is more than happy to do the nitty-gritty defensively as well. I'm not saying he's an elite defender by any means, but he is a more than serviceable defender and isn't just a one-dimensional attacking and rebounding and defender. He is more than happy to close down on his man if they are looking to create separation and certainly being a difference maker in the game. And so he's got that skill set that goes alongside the traits that ultimately saw him drafted and now traded to the Gold Coast Suns, which is good user of the ball, got a nice high-end turn of speed about him, and can be aggressive and open up the game with his ball movement and his creative play. So he's a very, very handy player, and barring missing out on the grand final and being overlooked in Collingwood's premiership victory just 12 months ago, I think most people would have thought over the past 3 or 4 years he was in Collingwood's best 22. Barring that grand final, I think he was, and even in this season gone, he played 20 games. So certainly one favour back in the eyes of Craig McRae and was back in view inside that best 22. What does it mean for Collingwood, though? I think when they found out at the end of August, start of September, that John was requesting the trade to Gold Coast, they knew they had to replace him. And they had multiple avenues and options that could get there. It could be an Ed Allen, who they are looking to give opportunities to. Harry Dimitri, fan of the channel. Hey, Harry, how are you, mate? Hasn't really had an opportunity debut. Not a halfbacker, but a midfielder that this could be the way into the side. Pendlebury, maybe spend a bit more time back there. Crisp. These were the names that I think people were looking to. But then once they got their hands on a Dan Houston, well, any felt loss of Noble out of the side was immediately forgotten. Dan Houston is all Australian caliber, and he has been for multiple seasons now. Outside of a little bit more high-end, elite, top-end speed, Dan trumps John at every single other arena and area of the ground and every single skill set. And that is not to put John down by any means. Rather, it just elevates and celebrates that Dan is elite in this position and one of the best halfback players in the entirety of the AFL league. And so despite losing some draft assets and some other players in this multi-club trade, I think Collingwood just feel like they've come out supremely on top in this space because they've got rid of a nice AFL player. And he is a nice AFL player to an elite player. So in a like-for-like space, Noble out, Houston in, Collingwood instantly are a better side as a result of it. What does it mean for the Gold Coast Suns? Well, they've recognised that they need speed and class coming off the halfback. And they feel like they have met both of those needs now with the landing of Noble and Dan Rioli from Richmond in this same trade period. They've tried multiple options across halfback this year. Buderick, Sexton, Flanders, Powell. None of them really just landed for them. It's why they've gone and attracted these two players to sit in that spot. Rioli's got a little bit more high-end speed and a bit more evasiveness about him than John, who does run the lines a bit more directly. But I think those two players combined just add to them exactly what they need, which is high durability, high availability, good top-end speed, good ball use, and definitely change the dynamic of their halfback line. So I think in totality between Noble and Rioli now landing, we should see a much more aggressive and progressive ball movement coming off the Gold Coast Suns backline that we just haven't seen over the past few years. What does it mean for us in fantasy footy? Well, he played 20 games for us this year. He's been relatively consistent and durable. Arguably, that's probably the best skill set he has. Again, good use of the ball, good run and carry player, got some defensive efforts, but he just plays every single week. He's available for selection every single week. And that, I think, is a really unheralded skill set, and availability is super critical in this modern day AFL. So I like that for him. I think that's his number one strength. And that's helpful for us in fantasy footy too, especially in drafts where you don't want to be going to the waiver wire, or in classic where you're just constantly farming trade in, trade out because a player's not fit. That said, mid to low 70s averages, depending on the format that you play, a little bit higher in SuperCoach, almost handful of tons in SuperCoach, a couple AFL Fantasy tons last year. So can score okay, but it's on the rarer side of the year. Again, you think of the 4 SuperCoach tons he gave us last year, that's 1 in 5. It's 1 in 10 in AFL Fantasy. That is not classic relevant. And with Rioli in the team now, I don't see a pathway, despite Gold Coast defenders and rebounders that had that opportunity. You think Sexton, you think Flanders, you think Powell for a couple of games there. These were all really helpful scorers for us. I just don't think Noble gets the primary space to score to make him classic relevant. In drafts, I don't mind him as a late round selection. Like I said, his availability is good. It's pretty darn good, to be honest. And I think his scoring is solid enough that if he's in this mid-70s to flirting with the low 80s, depending on the format you're in, well, that makes him draftable depending on the depth of your squad. So not someone you should be considering at all in Classic. I do not see the pathway to funneling the ball through him when you've got a Rioli there, who I do rate as a more elite rebounder and a more elite defender than what John is. So solid enough, a late round draft pick, and that's probably it from my perspective. But do you agree or disagree with my take about John Noble? If you're watching this on YouTube, you can comment below and let me know what you think his scoring is going to look like from a fantasy football perspective for us next year. If you're listening to this as an audio podcast and you haven't subscribed to this channel, make sure you do so. And you can get in touch with us across social media to join the conversation about John and all the other players that have moved clubs this off-season through the trade and free agency mechanism. The details for that, our Patreon, and to gain access to some Coaches Panel merch are in the details of the description of this episode. Hey, thanks so much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed the series. We'll be back with you real soon, talking more things from the trade and free agency period of 2024.